Thank you. We have such a full agenda. We're going to go ahead and get started, but as folks come in, we hope they'll continue to introduce themselves and say where they're from. So I want to officially welcome you to EdPrepLab's 2021 Spring Convening, Elevating Exemplary Practice. I think most of you know me, but in case you don't, I'm Maria Heiler, and I'm the director of the Washington, D.C. office and a senior researcher at the Learning Policy Institute. You all know me mostly in my role as the director of the Educator Preparation Laboratory, which we all refer to as the EdPrepLab. We're so excited to bring together members new and old in this virtual space so we can inspire, share, and learn together. Since we were last together, Arizona State University, Boston College, Lehman College, North Carolina State University, Towson University, University of Connecticut, and Western Kentucky University have officially joined our network. We also have our partners with us as well. I'm delighted to extend a warm welcome to our PK-12 partner districts and policy and philanthropy partners. Our November all-member convening feels like a lifetime ago, especially since we've been gathering in small groups of our inquiry groups. We had our January inaugural policy summit, and we've been coming together at learning cafes. But it's been an intense 8 months. It feels like we've been on the final climb on a journey of COVID-related hybrid, virtual, and school reopenings. No matter what your role, you've been in the thick of it. And while we might be at the top of the hill, the destination is still unseen around the next bend. As we go into the summer, we know that the reverberations of COVID are still to come. We need this community to think together about learning acceleration to account for the last year and a half of trauma and learning interruptions our students have faced. I think it's fitting that we gather during Pride Month, a celebration of our LGBTQ+ community, in defiance of the increased attacks and increased media attention in some cases on children, families, and communities. This is a community that has always centered equity in our work, and we've dug even deeper over the last 18 months with a renewed sense of urgency in light of George Floyd's murder, trial, and conviction of his murderer, combined with increased anti-Asian violence, a national reckoning with racism, along with a rash of mass shootings, several of which hit very close to your own communities. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because I know so many of you in this space. You work tirelessly for the children of this nation, ensuring they have the teachers and leaders they need for today and the future. We've created EdPrepLab as a collaborative space to inspire, encourage, and support one another in this work. The exemplary practices you're engaged in at your various institutions and organizations are key to transforming educator preparation. And that's what's bringing us together across these 3 days. And we have quite an agenda for you. Today, we will focus on getting reacquainted for some and acquainted for others. It's about cross-institutional sharing and getting to know EdPrepLab's programs. You'll also have a chance to talk to folks in your same role at different institutions in our networking lounges. And this will prepare you for tomorrow when we will have a variety of sessions on the current work and innovations taking place across programs. Then Wednesday will be our opportunity to plan our future work together. You'll be engaged in critical conversations that will shape the focus of our work to come. We want to acknowledge the team from the Learning Policy Institute and Bank Street Graduate School of Education who are behind this work. You often see just a few of us on screen, but it takes the collective work of these folks to make the magic happen. And we want to give a special thank you to Beatrice Benavides. You're all here because of her. I know that you recognize her name because you received lots of emails from her, and she's the one who keeps the wheels on the track and our train moving forward. So thank you so much, Beatrice. We also like to acknowledge our steering committee. They are core partners in this work and provide strategic guidance and feedback to the direction of EdPrepLab. We're committed to this being a community by, as well as for, the members of the network. I'd like to thank our funders for their generous support of the Educator Preparation Laboratory. The Carnegie Corporation of New York and the W. Clement and Jesse V. Stone Foundation provide direct project support. In addition, core operating support for the Learning Policy Institute is provided by the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, Heisen Simons Foundation, William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, Rakes Foundation, and the Sandler Foundation. We want to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Dean Rebecca Cantor at the University of Colorado, Denver. Dean Cantor was an amazing leader and advocate for children, teachers, and schools. We'll miss her contributions to EdPrepLab and the field as a whole. She will be sorely missed.
Thank you, Maria, for those acknowledgements. Our hearts go out to our colleagues at UC Denver and, of course, to Dean Cantor's family. I think most of you know me too, but I am Jessica Charles, and I lead Bank Street's half of the partnership of EdPrepLab. And I'd like to now spend a couple of minutes orienting you to the platform we are using for this event and for our agenda today. As you can see from the agenda, after this meeting, we will move to the member gallery to visit one another's institutional exhibits and follow the gallery. And following the gallery walk, we will meet up in the network lounges to debrief what we saw and network with colleagues. At the end of the day, we will end the day with a closing session back here. We have worked to make this a seamless and straightforward experience for you. And I want to orient you a little bit to the platform. So right now you are in a Zoom meeting that has taken you away from the lobby. And when you are ready for the next activity, you will return to the lobby and you will be able to access sessions, the member gallery, the networking lounge, and our website for those of you who are interested in learning more about EdPrepLab and the resource library that we are continuously compiling. And you may also access instructions for all of the activities during the convening by clicking on this button. And if you are a presenter or a facilitator and you need the materials that help guide those sessions, they are available here. There's also a tech tips button, and you can also, if you have any trouble, get in touch with the help desk. Please consider the lobby your home base. You can move from the lobby to any part of the platform. Also, please note that our member gallery and our networking lounges are open 24 hours a day for the duration of the convening. So feel free to take advantage of those spaces to work with colleagues or to spend more time learning about other programs when you are not participating in a scheduled event. And now we'd like to spend some time reflecting on our own work, or on our work and growth over the past 2 years in research, practice, and policy, and begin to chart our course forward as a growing community of scholars, practitioners, and policy partners who are deeply invested in preparing the educators who will lead us into the future.
Hello all. I'd like to take just a few minutes to ground us in the research that was foundational to the creation of EdPrepLab and share some ways we can envision collaborative research efforts in the future. As most of you know, EdPrepLab came out of 2 original studies, Preparing Teachers for Deeper Learning, which was a book published in 2019, and Preparing Leaders for Deeper Learning, which should be published later in 2021. And I look forward to holding up that book in the future. The findings of these studies are complementary, demonstrating the cohesion across teacher and leader preparation we're seeking to develop in EdPrepLab. The domains of preparing teachers for deeper learning are teaching for equity and social justice, grounding learning and development and personalization, contextualizing learning, applying and transferring learning, and learning in communities of practice. Leadership preparation for deeper learning, preparation programs develop leaders who follow and share a vision for deeper learning, prioritize equity and adopt a social justice orientation, build collaborative communities of practice, provide deeper learning opportunities by creating developmentally appropriate and improvement-focused teacher and staff supports, and adopt a contextualized approach for systemic alignment to deeper learning. You all became members because you are engaged in exemplary practices across these domains and are committed to continuous improvement, or you aspire to this type of preparation fully across your programs. This is about preparing the teachers and leaders our students need and deserve now and in the future. And this work is more important than ever given the impact of COVID-19 and an increasing, much needed national focus on racial justice. This research is not static. In fact, as we have learned more about brain science and the science of learning and development, we can see a greater focus on social emotional learning, trauma and healing informed pedagogy, and culturally sustaining pedagogies. We know this research isn't new. In fact, many of you have been engaged in this research for years. But what we're seeing now is a more intentional connection of this research to practice in the last decade. Lifting up this research to the wider field in ways that can be easily digestible and adopted is a key goal of EdPrepLab. Because this research isn't static, we want EdPrepLab members to contribute to it collectively. And there are many ways for you to do so. We're in the process of identifying research you are currently conducting to lift up in research briefs. Short 6 to 8 page papers that share research about best practices with specific examples of how you're integrating that research into your educator preparation practice. We also want your collaborative cross-institutional groups to yield publications, everything from peer-reviewed reports to blog posts, as well as the research briefs I just mentioned. We are also in the midst of taking the research base and developing design principles for educator preparation. This is all on top of conference presentations, local, regional, and national. As many of you know, we've been presenting cross-institutionally at our major education conferences and are excited to continue to do so. The foundation of transforming the field must be research-based best practices. I'm excited to have one of our members share about his Inquiries Group's research project. Jabari Mahiri is a professor of education and the William and Mary Jane Brinton Family Chair in Urban Teaching at the University of California, Berkeley. Jabari?
I was excited to join my colleagues at UC Berkeley, UCLA, and Montclair State in this inquiry project organized by EdPrepLab, because I think that Senate faculty members particularly need to have a much higher involvement in issues that connect research and practice and actually have impacts on practice. And this is what I think we were able to do in terms of the cross-fertilization that we share with one another across the 3 institutions, all of us addressing particular challenges and innovations that we've engaged in and making impacts on professional development of teacher leaders, of site district leaders, of district level leaders in practice. And one of the things that I think came out of that is a desire for us to want to concretize and document how this had affected us personally in terms of this wonderful opportunity that was provided by EdPrepLab to do this kind of work. So we created a small research project where we asked ourselves 2 research questions, one on the institutional level and one on the individual level. Institutionally, we talked about what processes did the Critical Friends Network of educator preparation programs help inform our institutional practices. And we all spoke to that in our narrative form. And then on the individual level, we talked about how that engaging in these consultancies inform our work in preparing anti-racist, socially just teachers and leaders. And we also had a narrative response to that. So across all of our participants in all 3 institutions, we have a collaborative response of the themes that came up out of the second question of how it dealt with us individually. And then we have institution by institution responses to the original prompt of how did this help us inform our institutional practices. We are excited about analyzing and preparing this data for the presentation coming up at the conference in June. And we look forward to sharing that with all of our colleagues internally among our 3 collaborators and with all of the EdPrepLab participants.
Thank you, Jabari. We'd like to take a moment to think more deeply about Jabari's experience and what it means for your research and our research agenda as a network. Jabari and his colleagues saw an opportunity to develop research out of the inquiry project that was started at our EdPrepLab convening 2 years ago. In just a moment, you'll go into breakout rooms with a few colleagues for a couple of minutes to briefly introduce yourselves and reflect on the following. What aspect of educator preparation do you think would benefit from more cross-institutional research? And you're just going to have 4 minutes in your breakout room. So do a quick introduction and jump right into the conversations, and then we'll be brought back here in this main convening space together. We'll see you back shortly.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm happy that we're all back together, and want to invite you to add to the chat any ideas that came up during your conversation, and any kind of insights or novel things that people talked about, or just things that really intrigued you about what you were learning. And we're going to, from one another, we're going to go on now to the next portion of our program, which is to look at some of the practice, how we have been working on developing our practice work over the past 2 years. And then we will meet back here and for further directions. The work you have done together as an EdPrepLab community over the last 2 years has given shape to the original concept of EdPrepLab as an engine of innovation that lifts up exemplary practice in educator preparation. You have done this in so many ways, including through collaborative inquiry groups, smaller issue-specific working groups, and learning cafes, sharing your practice through written briefs, and by contributing to our educator preparation resource library. And this is just a screenshot of our website where that lives. In fact, we're very happy to announce today that we have 5 practice briefs in the pipeline that will be published soon. This year, in addition to carrying forward the work we have started, we will build new working groups around issues you have identified as most pressing and explore links between those issues and education policy. We will also be asking you to showcase your exemplary practices by adding to our resource library and continuing to create and write practice briefs. Do you remember the 2019 Gallery Walk? We've heard a lot about it from our members over the past 2 years. The community of EdPrepLab was launched when we all met at Bank Street College in New York City 2 summers ago. At that convening, our 15 founding institutions shared some of the exciting work they had been doing with one another, and new relationships spanning the country were formed. Much like we will do right after this opening segment, our members participated in a gallery walk that showcased both the exemplary practices at their institution and posed problems of practice to discuss with their colleagues. During the gallery walk at this year's convening, we hope you will spend time learning about programs that inspire you, raise questions about your own work, and generate new ideas and new relationships. In the time since our founding, members have been a resource for one another as we have all grappled with the unexpected pandemic and the persistent racial violence and oppression in our country. EdPrepLab members came together in the midst of the immediate crises facing their programs and their local districts to share ideas for responding to the enormous upheaval the pandemic caused, often in incredibly innovative ways. Members shared how they adjusted clinical work, moved their coursework online, partnered with other departments in their institutions, and reached out to alumni who are working in local schools to keep their programs going. The Learning Cafe series was born out of this effort and has become a consistent feature of EdPrepLab programming, where members regularly share their work and learn from one another. We anticipate that practices, programs, and institutional structures that are shared at this year's convening will inspire more Learning Cafe presentations and discussions this year. This has been an incredibly consequential 2 years. In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and the national protests against racial injustice, our members also formed a racial justice working group to examine practices in their programs and institutions that perpetuate anti-Blackness and racism. Our members used this group to not only share what they were doing at their own institutions, but to think collectively about what we could do to shape the conversation in order to create anti-racist programs and practices across the field of educator preparation. This is an ongoing endeavor, and many of you will have an opportunity to join in conversations led by the current members of this group to plan the next stage of this collective work. We see the racial justice group as a crucial working group this year, one that will challenge the status quo in our educator preparation programs, inspire innovation, and draw on our collective power as EdPrepLab to advance racial justice across the field. One of the long-term projects of EdPrepLab has been to bring together cross-institutional inquiry groups to examine a pressing problem of practice at their institutions, such as the group that spurred the research project Jabari spoke about earlier. At our 2019 convening, 6 of these inquiry groups were formed, but because of the pandemic, most groups were not able to continue work exactly as they had planned, because most of these groups intended to visit one another's institutions and travel became impossible. But every group has made progress, and several groups have been able to continue consistently meeting and working together with some amazing results. This year, members will be invited to continue those groups and/or to move on to another working group. We hope that travel between institutions will be possible in the near future, so the good work you've been doing virtually will be able to transfer into face-to-face connections. One of our inquiry groups, which looked at deeper learning pedagogies and teacher education programs at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the University of Colorado, Denver, and Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, have told us about the immediate impact of this work on their programs. I would like to introduce you to Heather Haynes-Smith, Associate Professor at Trinity University, to share a bit about this group's experience and how it has impacted her program at Trinity. Heather?
Participating in EdPrepLab and our deeper learning inquiry group was so powerful for us. At Trinity, we were able to design a system for understanding our strengths and opportunities for growth and deeper study around providing opportunities for deeper learning across our programs. Specifically, with feedback from our collaborative partners at UC Denver and UNC Chapel Hill, we were able to design and administer a survey tool that helped us understand faculty and student perspectives across undergrad and graduate programs about our deeper learning opportunities across our program. Our inquiry group was so helpful for refining our survey and framing our work. And I think we're also really grateful for the accountability across our groups through the many challenges and changes the last few years have seen.
So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed listening to a little bit about Heather's experience. And we are actually going to ask you now to go back into new breakout rooms and to introduce yourselves to new colleagues and to consider what Heather just said about how she appreciated the opportunity to learn with her colleagues at UNC and CU Denver. And how she used the structure of that group to develop and strengthen her program's deeper learning practices. So when you break out, again, just quickly introduce yourselves and then please consider the question, what aspects of educator preparation for deeper learning and equity are important for us to take up in the EdPrepLab network? And we'll see you back here in just a few minutes.
Welcome back again after another great round of small group discussions. My name is Steve Wojciechowicz, and I'm a senior researcher and policy advisor at the Learning Policy Institute. as well as the policy lead for EdPrepLab. Now that we have had the opportunity to dig in on the research and practice aspects of EdPrepLab's work, it's time to turn to policy, our strategic priority that considers how to broadly support and incentivize transformative educator preparation. As Maria shared with us earlier, EdPrepLab was built on 2 studies of educator preparation for deeper learning. And while both of these studies contain detailed descriptions of research and practice, each also contained a chapter focused on policy. In both policy-focused chapters, the question was the same. How can policymakers at the local, state, and federal level support and incentivize the kind of research-based, high-quality practice underway in these exemplary programs? I mentioned these chapters to show how the connection between research, practice, and policy has been baked into EdPrepLab from its inception. EdPrepLab's goals include not only supporting programs that are equity-focused, student-centered, and grounded in the science of learning and development, that's from our website, but also, quote, seeking to expand these approaches by aligning practice, policy, and research toward the transformation of educator preparation across the country. And so, along with our focus on network building, sharing best practices for educator preparation, and enacting research-based structures and pedagogies for deeper learning and equity, we also make policy work a priority. For EdPrepLab, policy work can take any number of forms, including connecting EdPrepLab leaders and faculty, policymakers, and policy organizations around transformative policy agendas. Engaging EdPrepLab program leaders and faculty in connecting practice and policy and shifting the narrative on the value of educator preparation. Advancing policy, informed by strong examples of practice, to strengthen educator preparation at the local, state, and federal levels. As we invite our EdPrepLab members into this work, our engagement is driven by 2 guiding questions. Which policies enable or incentivize the transformation of educator preparation, and which policies hinder or work against this transformation? The need for such policy engagement in educator preparation has only grown since EdPrepLab was launched. We are facing nationwide shortages of qualified educators, driven by attrition and by a decade of decreasing educator preparation program enrollment, with still greater struggles in recruiting and retaining teachers of color. These shortages have left many schools staffed by underprepared teachers who experience high turnover rates, particularly schools serving the highest need students and students of color. These same issues affect and complicate the work of school leaders. Policymakers' responses to these crises have led to underinvestment in strong preparation and high churn levels in schools that need the greatest educator skill and continuity. The stresses the COVID-19 pandemic has placed on our system and on educators have only exacerbated these crises and highlighted these inequities. For all these reasons and more, EdPrepLab has a vital role to play. By linking research-based preparation to policy levers, EdPrepLab can influence the field, showing policymakers and the public what high-quality educator preparation looks like, and building momentum for investments to support high retention pathways into the profession. Of course, policy engagement has been a part of our work since the founding of EdPrepLab. Our policy partners played an important role even in our first convening in June 2019. That year also saw the start of our work with the Council of Chief State School Officers on a series of reviews of state licensure and accreditation systems in 5 states. 4 of these 5 reviews, which have provided recommendations for advancing high-quality preparation, have been completed and have informed the design of a residency grant program and proposed teacher preparation standards. The fall of 2019 also saw the start of our webinar series, produced in collaboration with the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, which has included webinars on social emotional learning, cultural competence and equity, preparing educators for diverse, equitable, and inclusive classrooms, and preparing educators for deeper learning and equity. We began to ramp up our policy engagement efforts in the second year of the initiative, further establishing EdPrepLab in the policy space and opening up lines of communication with our network. After a check-in with members in the summer of 2020, we included 3 policy-related sessions in the EdPrepLab Fall Forum. EdPrepLab staff participated in events such as the November meeting of the Education Leaders Network and presented at the Association of Research and Bargaining Professionals annual conference in December. That same month, we distributed an institutional policy survey to gather information about conditions in the field from our members, revealing trends which informed our programming and our conversations with policy partners, and which we shared with the membership in our February 2021 newsletter. The ramp up of policy work really took off with our inaugural policy summit in January 2021. Launched with a discussion of how social justice lies at the core of policy for high quality preparation and outlining policy ideas needed to achieve a diverse, well-prepared, stable educator workforce for all schools. The Policy Summit attracted participants from across EdPrepLab member institutions and from policy partners and philanthropic organizations. We followed up in the Policy Summit with 3 practice and policy conversations organized specifically to provide opportunities for members to process and discuss the Policy Summit and share their perspectives on policy challenges. Our most recent event prior to this convening was our first Policy Learning Cafe in May. Presented in collaboration with AACTE and featuring members of the Learning Policy Institute's federal policy team, this event focused on federal funding opportunities and educator preparation in response to the American Rescue Plan Act. Our presenters laid out the funding landscape created by this pandemic relief legislation, and we followed up with additional resources to provide our members with the information to understand potential uses of this funding. Along with these member and public-facing events, EdPrepLab staff have been working in multiple states with network and outside of the network to inform initiatives underway in educator preparation. With the help of our members, we hope to continue moving forward with our policy engagement on multiple levels, including a continuation of our schedule of member and public-facing events, along with increased opportunities for involvement. Working together across institutions to understand the effects of policy on practice and identify practice to policy connections and leverage points, documenting and sharing accounts of policy engagement and the impacts of policy to encourage practitioner engagement and inform policymaker action, and collaborating with EdPrepLab staff to ask questions, request resources, and identify opportunities to participate in influencing policy. We see this last point as vital. Our members are our best source of information on what's happening in the field and in their states and local contexts. And in turn, the more we learn from our members, the better we are able to provide research and support for them. And so we want to encourage you to build upon your participation in the EdPrepLab network, through which you've come together to support one another in research and practice, and do the same for policy-related questions and opportunities. As I've described, EdPrepLab member institution faculty and leaders have had multiple opportunities to engage in our policy efforts. One faculty member who's been a participant in several of our policy-focused events and with her colleagues at Alverno College provided key information to inform our report on licensure and program approval in Wisconsin is Desiree Pointer-Mace. Desiree is Professor of Education and Director of Graduate Education Programs in the Division of Education, School of Graduate Professional Studies at Alverno College. It's my pleasure to turn this presentation over to her so she can share with you her perspective on EdPrepLab's policy work.
Thanks, Steve. I'm really happy to be here as part of this convening and to share some of the ways in which my colleagues and I at Alverno College are finding a real sense of community and empowerment, particularly related to our developing understandings and work in policy spaces. So we're a very small education prep program. We have fewer than 10 full-time faculty and a deep sense of connection to our community and our state. We participate in structures for our state organizations for educator preparation. Many of us serve on state councils or ad hoc committees or task forces and so on. And so we have been in and around policy spaces for a long time. That said, I think there's a particularly special kind of community that we've found through our participation in EdPrepLab, because we're not always most similar to folks who happen to be geographically proximal to us. So in some ways, it's actually very powerful to be among other programs, for example, that have a deep practice of deeper learning educator preparation, and then learn with those folks around federal initiatives that may impact us, grant programs that might support us, and even equity initiatives that we can be a part of nationwide that might address hyper-local issues of equity in our state, region, city, neighborhood. But I think in all, we're stronger together. And so I think that for a small but mighty program like Alverno College, we are deeply appreciating the deeper learning related to policy that our membership in EdPrepLab gives us. Thanks so much.
Well, we hope you're all inspired by what we've achieved together so far.
and we're looking forward to the work we'll accomplish together as a community in the future. I would like to again thank Jabari, Heather, and Desiree for their thoughts on their experiences with EdPrepLab. And now I'll turn it over to Jessica for a couple more directions before we launch our day together.
Hello, everyone. So we want to just give you a couple of directions for how you can get back and go to the member gallery. So from this session, we're in a Zoom session, so we'll close out of Zoom and you will be back in the lobby. And when you get there, you can enter the member gallery by clicking on this, this green button here, member gallery. Once you are in the gallery, please meet with your institution at your exhibit. If you don't have an exhibit, then you can feel free to start perusing right away. Institutions are alphabetized across 3 pages. So you can access those pages from down here at the bottom, 1, 2, or 3. Once you gather with your colleagues from your institution at your exhibit, decide on a plan that will allow each participant from your institution to visit other exhibits while you rotate responsibility for monitoring the chat in your exhibit. And just a reminder, you'll need to scroll to get there. Try to get to 7 exhibits during the time you are visiting. And when you are there, please leave comments in the chat that respond to the following prompts. What practices stood out to you as strong or exemplary? What questions do you have for the institution? And what connections do you see for your own work? So this is a picture of Bank Street's virtual exhibit. And you will notice here down at the bottom is where you can find the chat. So if you don't see it immediately, scroll up. Please note that you are able to pause or enlarge and actually download the slides for each institution. And you should try to get to 7 institutions and try to move away from ones that are really crowded so that we can sort of spread our conversations across the network. If you want to know more about an institution and you just don't have time, or you're not able to talk to the people from that institution, you can either meet up in the network lounges later with them, or you can always download their slides to get more information. And you can also view the directions that I'm talking about right now and right here by clicking View Directions. After the gallery walk, the member gallery is actually going to shut down temporarily so that we can have an opportunity to meet with one another, to debrief the gallery walk, and to make connections to your work and with one another. Please leave the member gallery by 1:40 p.m. Eastern time and return to the main lobby. And then you can select network lounges from the main lobby and then enter the room that you selected and which is on your personalized agenda that came in an email from Beatrice. You will see a prompt in the lounge lobby to get the conversation started, and Maria, Steve, and I, as well as other EdPrepLab staff, will join you in conversation in both the member gallery and in the networking lounges. When you are finished in the networking lounge, please return for a closing session at 3 p.m. Eastern, of course, back here by returning to the main lobby and selecting sessions. And we hope you have a great time and have very fruitful conversations with your colleagues. Thank you so much for being here today.